Mr. Sablan. Each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, today I am happy to speak in support of my legislation, H.R. 4073, a bill to authorize the Secretary of Agriculture to accept the quitclaim, disclaimer, and relinquishment of a railroad right-of-way within the Pike National Forest in my district. Originally granted to the Mount Manitou Park and Incline Railway Company, the Incline Trail exists today as the roadbed to the former Mount Manitou Scenic Incline Railway, which was a cable car that took people up the eastern face of Rocky Mountain Pikes Peak at an average grade of 40%, with some of the steepest sections at a grade of 68%. Today, it has become a popular hike for adventure seekers in the Pikes Peak region, and it is said to be hiked by nearly 500,000 times each year, although access is still considered trespassing. A citizens' initiative begun over 8 years ago to encourage making access to this popular trail legal. Although all parties are amenable, due to an act dated on March 3, 1875, the Forest Service has been unable to accept the quitclaim from the Manitou and Pikes Peak Railway. Recognizing the problem, the railway company came to me and asked that I carry this legislation to allow the Forest Service the authority to accept the quitclaim, which is the last major hurdle in allowing the incline trail to be legally opened for public use. Although several people have informally maintained the incline, no formal steps have been taken by any of the property owners to maintain the incline since 1997. Legalizing access to the trail will allow the surrounding communities access to repair sections of the trail that are in poor condition and thus make the use safer for all hikers. It has been my pleasure to work with the interested parties in helping to gain legal access to this unique trail that I believe will be a wonderful addition to the region's trail inventory. I would like to thank the Forest Service and Senator Michael Bennett's office for their diligence in working with my office in this process. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
And Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, H.R. 4073 clears up a deed for a popular hiking destination, the Manitou Incline in Colorado. Upon enactment, the Pike National Forest will have full ownership of the trail, which ascends 2,000 feet to Pikes Peak. We do not object to this legislation, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado.
Does the gentleman have any other speakers?
No, we don't, Mr. Speaker. I'm ready to yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 4073 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Northern
Mr. Speaker,
Mariana Islands.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 and the chair's prior announcement, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3641 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 450, H.R. 3641, a bill to establish Pinnacles National Park in the state of California as a unit of the National Park System and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, and the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablan, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
H.R. 3641 renames Pinnacles National Monument as Pinnacles National Park. Pinnacles was originally designated in 1908 by President Roosevelt under the authority of the Antiquities Act. However, under this legislation, it is not anticipated that management would change dramatically as the area is already considered a unit of the National Park Service. The Natural Resources Committee made important changes to H.R. 3641, allowing us to bring this to the floor today. For example, the committee removed a nearly 3,000-acre wilderness expansion and struck unnecessary land acquisition authority. With these changes, the goal of elevating recognition of the area as a national park is achieved without limiting access. At that, Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
This time, gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my
Without
remarks.
objection.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, President Theodore Roosevelt designated Pinnacles National Monument in California under the authority of the Antiquities Act of 1908. H.R. 3641 would redesignate the monument as the Pinnacles National Park. While the name change will not significantly alter management of the area, it would raise the profile of this beautiful resource and hopefully attract even more visitors. Representative Farr is to be commended for his tenacity in moving this legislation forward. He has had to make some very difficult concessions to achieve passage of his bill today, and it is our hope that we can continue working on this to achieve his full vision for Pinnacles National Park, and I reserve the balance of my time.
From Colorado.
Speaker, I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, at this time I yield as much time as he may consume the distinguished gentleman from California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for such time as he may consume.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 3641, known as the Pinnacles National Park Act. As sponsor of the bipartisan legislation, I'd also like to express my thanks to our friend and my friend Congressman Denham from California for his original co-sponsorship of H.R. 3641. The Pinnacles National Park Act will elevate America's 11th national monument, the Pinnacles National Monument, to a national park. Only Congress can designate a national park. This is the right thing to do because there are not a lot of examples of tectonic plate movement in our national park system. This legislation would also rename the current Pinnacles Wilderness after Schuyler Hayne, who first came to the area in 1886 and was largely responsible for getting the attention of Theodore Roosevelt, who first designated the monument in 1908. The first designation was to protect the beautiful rock formations of the Talus Caves, notable for its tunnels. It has since been expanded several times by executive order and by congressional mandate to its present size of over 26,000 acres. It's larger than several existing national parks. Pinnacles is a culturally significant area for several Native American tribes. It served as the backdrop for John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men and East of Eden. Anyone who has visited this place knows it's special. From exploring caves to viewing springtime wildflowers to hiking through spire-like rock formations, visitors and families can participate in activities that leave lasting memories. It is truly worthy of national park status. The pinnacles themselves are half of the skeletal remains of the Nenach volcano, which erupted 23 million years ago, and are located at the junction of the Pacific and Northern American tectonic plates. The San Andreas Fault is just 4 miles to the east, and Miners Gulch and Pinnacles Faults run directly through the Pinnacles system. The Pinnacles system is home to 149 species of birds, 49 mammals, 22 reptiles, 6 amphibians, 68 butterflies, 36 dragonflies and damselflies, and nearly 400 different kinds of bees. I didn't even know there were that many, and many thousands of other invertebrates. One project I'm particularly proud about is the reintroduction of the endangered California condor, the largest flying land bird in North America. Since 2003, the National Park System has been part of the California Condor Recovery Program to reestablish California condors at the Pinnacles National Monument. This cooperative endeavor between the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Ventana Wildlife Society, Pinnacles Partnership, and others, in collaboration with the California Condor Recovery Team, have done a tremendous job on recovery efforts and public education. Many visitors come to this region to get an opportunity to see the condor in the wild. This legislation has broad support from our counties of San Benito and Monterey, as well as the Chambers of Commerce, Visitors Bureaus, and from the respective counties who are enthusiastically supportive of this legislation. There is no opposition to the bill. The Pinnacles is uniquely located in coastal California to attract thousands of visitors each year, which provide a viable and vital economic engine for San Benito County. Tourism is primarily focused for many of the business owners on the Central Coast. Increasing the number of tourists would promote the healthy impact for those not only in the retail sector, but also dining, lodging, and sightseeing opportunities. The new national park designation would strengthen the region's economic and tourism potential. There is no national park in that whole region. Research shows that for every $1 invested by the federal government into our national parks, they return $4 to the community in tourism dollars. Situated slightly inland from the California coast, Pinnacles National Monument has not yet realized its full potential to reach locals and tourists. Many tourists travel, dine, and stay overnight in areas along the coast such as Monterey and Santa Cruz, where they are visiting to recreate, camp, view wildlife, and enjoy the great outdoors. However, many are not aware of the Pinnacles National Monument, and as a result, do not make the short trip inland to see this treasure. By elevating its statute to a national park, I believe that more visitors will come through our restaurants and businesses, and more visitors will stay overnight near the park. I'd like to end with an inspiring quote from Ken Burns, who directed the National Parks, America's Best Idea. In a letter of support, Mr. Burns wrote for this legislation, he stated, "A Pinnacles National Park would preserve the unique portion of our land, not only a critical record of geologic time, what John Muir would have called the grand geological library, that helps Americans look back millions of years to understand the vast tectonic forces that shaped and still shape our continent, but also a rare habitat for condors, a wide variety of flowers, and 400 species of bees. It would preserve a place that over centuries, Native Americans, early Spanish settlers, homesteaders from the East, and Basque sheepherders have considered home, offering an important series of perspectives on a larger sweep of American history. With that bit of wisdom, I'd urge my colleagues to support our bipartisan legislation. Again, I'd like to thank Jeff Denham, Congressman from the region, for supporting and co-sponsoring H.R. 3641, the Pinnacles National Park Act. I ask your support and yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman from Colorado.
I'd like to inquire if the gentleman from Northern Marianas has any other speakers.
No, we don't, Mr. Speaker, and so at this time, I yield back the balance.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado.
Likewise, I yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3641 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3706 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 435, H.R. 3706, a bill to create the Office of Chief Financial Officer of the Government of the Virgin Islands and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, and the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablan, each will control 20 minutes. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
And I now yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
H.R. 3706 would create the Office of Chief Financial Officer of the Government of the Virgin Islands to assist in the development of a balanced budget through a review of incoming revenues and recommend spending limits to the governor and legislature. The intent behind the bill is to create more fiscal certainty and address concerns regarding the overestimation of incoming revenues, which leads to overspending and a budget deficit in the Virgin Islands. The bill would allow Virgin Islands voters to have the final say on the office. If they find this to be a successful process, they will vote in a referendum to determine if the office should be retained in the long term. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
And Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3706 to create an Office of Chief Financial Officer for the Government of the United States Virgin Islands. Delegate Christensen is to be commended for her hard work on behalf of her constituents. Today marks the fourth time the House will vote on legislation she sponsored to provide greater accountability and transparency in the management of her district's finances. This is a good bill, and I urge my colleagues to support its adoption, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado.
I continue to reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Northern Mariana Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield as much time as she may consume to the distinguished gentle lady from the United States Virgin Islands, Dr. Christensen.
Gentlelady is recognized for such time as she may consume.
Thank you. I thank the ranking member for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise to speak in strong support of H.R. 3706 legislation I introduced to provide for Chief Financial Officer for the Government of the Virgin Islands. I want to begin by thanking Chairman Hastings and Ranking Member Markey of the Natural Resources Committee for their support in making it possible for H.R. 3706 to be on the floor today. I also want to thank Subcommittee on Fisheries, Wildlife, Oceans, and Insular Affairs Chairman John Fleming, and of course Ranking Member Kilili Sablan for their support as well. Mr. Speaker, today, as you heard, marks the fourth time in 9 years that this House will consider legislation that I have sponsored to provide for a CFO for my congressional district, the U.S. Virgin Islands. It has passed in the previous 3 times. While I have been severely criticized by some for its introduction, there are many who support it. But I continue to believe that having an independent professional third party being responsible for determining the amount of revenues that the local government has available to spend for an ensuing fiscal year would be a positive development for our government and is also generally supported by a broad cross-section of our electorate. When I first sponsored the first CFO bill in 2003, the territory was technically insolvent and urgent action was necessary to avoid needing a federal bailout and all that that would entail. After studying the experience of the District of Columbia, which sought and obtained a federal bailout, and the accompanying loss of political autonomy through a financial control board, I concluded then that it would have been better if we avoided being taken over by a control board, and I crafted my original CFO bill to do that. Unlike H.R. 3706, my first Chief Financial Officer bill did involve a loss of authority for the governor and legislature to accumulate public debt, but it was temporary and would have prevented a complete loss of political autonomy. Today, while the territory is experiencing very serious fiscal challenges, the government is not on the verge of imminent fiscal collapse and no longer has a structural deficit over $1 billion or annual deficits in excess of $100 million. In view of this, one could reasonably ask then why the need for the current bill. First of all, H.R. 3706 seeks to end the acrimony and mistrust among the different branches of Virgin Islands government and the public at large, and provide for revenue projections from a highly qualified person. This individual would be appointed by the governor and confirmed by the legislature, but does not serve at the pleasure of the governor. This is the process that's used by the District of Columbia currently through its CFO, and there have been no complaints from the chief executive of D.C., the mayor, about a loss of sovereignty or of a return to colonialism. Since last year, when the Virgin Islands Governor John P. DeYoung Jr. announced a pending $135 million deficit in his budget projections for fiscal year 2012, several members of the 29th legislature questioned the governor's numbers, and they have continued to do so, pointing to differences in figures between reports done by auditors and figures presented in budget documents. Similarly, public sector unions members, who have been greatly impacted by various austerity measures, also scoffed at the budget projections, saying, quote, there had not been enough transparency to truly demonstrate that there really was a financial crisis and that there was no other way to solve it but with layoffs or pay cuts, end of quote. H.R. 3706 does not affect in any way the governor or the legislature's ability to spend the territory's funds as they see fit. It simply attempts to end questions on what the exact revenue of the territory is so that we can move forward on a sound economic recovery. I'm not under any illusion that my CFO bill will be a cure-all for all that ails the Virgin Islands. I am, however, proposing it as a 5-year pilot program for improving transparency and trust in our budgetary and fiscal practices. If Virgin Islanders approve of the process and system for determining our annual budget limits that the bill provides, they can vote to make it permanent through a referendum that is provided after 4 years of the CFO's 5-year term. Each time I have introduced this or one of the earlier versions of the bill, there have been concerns that the United States Congress is imposing itself into the governance of the territory. There are some that would wish that this were the case, but I am not one of them, and this bill would not do that. Because we do not have a constitution, the people of the Virgin Islands have come to Congress on a number of occasions. For example, to attempt to abolish the office of lieutenant governor, or to expand borrowing authority, which we did, to limit the number of senators and for other purposes. I don't really see this process as being any different, coming from a representative of the people of the Virgin Islands and representing their interests. Moreover, attempts by our local legislature to pass similar legislation have failed, and legislative proposals by nonpartisan organizations have never been considered. Therefore, as the representative of the people of the U.S. Virgin Islands in the Congress, it fell to me, and I accept the responsibility. I just regret that our governor and I could not see eye to eye on this. The federal government has and will be providing significant funds to the U.S. Virgin Islands, especially in light of our economic disaster that currently exists. I am sure that having such an office as the one being proposed by H.R. 3706 will enhance our ability to successfully navigate through this very critical time because of the added accountability and transparency that it provides. And so I thank you for the time, and I urge my colleagues to support the adoption of H.R. 3706.
Gentleman from Colorado.
My colleague, Mr. Sablan, has any further speakers?
Mr. Speaker, at this time I have no further speakers, and I urge the adoption of the legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from Colorado.
I, too, yield back the balance of my time.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3706 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
Mr. Speaker,
Gentleman from Colorado.
I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present, and I make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20 and the chair's prior announcement, further proceedings on this motion will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass Senate 270.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
Senate 270, an act to direct the Secretary of the Interior to convey certain federal land to Deschutes County, Oregon.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, and the gentleman from the Northern Mariana Islands, Mr. Sablan, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on the bill under consideration.
Without objection.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Senate Bill 270 will convey to the city of La Pine and Deschutes County, Oregon, 910 acres in 3 parcels and require